Chapter 2431. Nollace raised his gaze and watched as Daisy walked toward him step by step and plunged herself into his arms. Nollace froze slightly in place, lowered his gaze, and asked, with a hoarse voice, "What's wrong?" She shook her head and pressed her cheek against his warm chest. "He's fine. Let's go already." Nollace stretched out his arms to hug her, kissed her forehead, and sneered. "You're so clingy." Daisy looked up at him and squinted as she smiled. "Are you saying that you dislike this personality of mine?" He smiled. "Nope." A few days later, the police confirmed that Zoe had committed the crime of intentional injury and issued an arrest warrant for her. More than half of Zoe's fans unfollowed her, leaving only some stubborn fans who were still whitewashing their idol. However, Zoe committed a crime and was officially banned by the entertainment industry. Now that she was evading the police, it would be almost impossible for her to recover from this mess in the future. In the hospital, Zafir sat on the bed. His face's complexion had somewhat recovered, his eyes were fixed on the bare tree branches outside the window, and he had been silent for a long time. Patricia was packing his belongings for him while nagging nonstop, trying to persuade him to leave the entertainment industry behind and go back to take over the Goslings' assets. Cameron bit her fork. "Yeah, I'll be teaching the trainees martial arts, cultivating their attitudes and personalities, building up their physiques, and improving their health. How good does that sound? And the main thing is that I can take in apprentices. As soon as I have taken in a batch of apprentices, I'll be considered as someone of higher status in the city, won't I? Just like when I was back on my home turf." Daisy chuckled. "Are you planning to take in apprentices, or thugs?" Cameron waved her hand. "Pfft. They're all the same, aren't they? Have you discussed this with my brother?" "Nope." Cameron leaned back in the chair. "Why should I discuss it with him? If he were to get aggressive again, I'd be the one who's going to have to suffer." Daisy was astonished for a moment. "Suffer? Does my brother abuse you?" Cameron blurted out, "Can it be considered abuse when it's done in bed?" Daisy was astounded and rendered speechless. Her cheeks flushed instantly, and she looked around subconsciously. Jesus Christ. That's too many details. Cameron did not stop there. "Your eldest brother isn't human at all. He always tosses me around on the bed and doesn't let me sleep at all. He even... Daisy covered her mouth that could not stop blabbering. The people sitting around them looked over with slightly weird expressions as if they had heard everything. Daisy's cheeks were as red as a cooked lobster. "Stop. You shouldn't be talking about this kind of thing when we're out in public." Cameron took her hand away. "Nollace treats you like this too?" Daisy's cheeks were so warm that they were about to smoke. This topic is so inappropriate." Cameron leaned closer to her. "So, am I right?" Cough, cough. Daisy was choked by her own words and quickly changed the subject. "Okay, where do you plan to set up the martial arts training center? Have you found a location?" "Not yet. I'm planning to bring you along after lunch." Cameron drank her soup slowly, thought of something, and put her spoon down. "The place that we went to last time seems pretty good." Daisy was taken aback. "That martial arts training center that we went to last time?" Cameron nodded. "Yes, it is located downtown and has an independent ring, and the interior is large too. Do you think we can find another location in Bassburg that has such a huge space?" Daisy gave it a good thought. "Even if you're only planning to rent a place, it's very difficult to find such a large space. Even if there's such a place, you might have to search for places in the suburbs." Chapter 2432. "I've been forced into doing so too." Zoe took off her mask and looked at the terrible environment. "How are you willing to live in this kind of place? Otherwise?" Tiffany gave off a smirk and spread her hands. "Can you go against those capitalists and beat them back in Bassburg? Don't you hate Daisy too?" Zoe walked up to her and propped her hands against the surface of the table. If it wasn't for them, you wouldn't even end up in this rotting place today. So how about we join forces? Tiffany took a glance at Zoe. You want us to join forces? What can you, a wanted criminal, contribute to this proposal of yours? I have nothing left, so I'm not afraid of anything. I know you were used by Zafir Gosling too, and I stabbed him. Consider that a thing that I did to avenge you. I heard about what happened to Tiffany back then. Although Tiffany seems to be the one who wanted to sabotage No Lace, Zafir was the actual mastermind who came up with the whole scheme behind the scenes. Tiffany was just his pawn, so she must not be reconciled to being used like that, right? Tiffany extinguished the cigarette butt in her hand and scoffed. What do you plan to do then? Zoe continued viciously. All of them care so much about Daisy, don't they? If that's the case, I want Daisy dead. I want them to suffer 100 times, 1,000 times more than we did. Back in Bassburg, Cameron asked Daisy to go out for lunch. However, instead of going to a restaurant, the two went to an Asian snack bar on the side of the road. Daisy, if I were to plan to start a martial arts training center in Bassburg, what would you think about that? Daisy glanced at her and looked surprised. You want to start a martial arts training center? Patricia chuckled. Of course not. You've arrived just in time. Talk some sense into this fella while I go out and get us some breakfast. Patricia then left the ward. Leah saw her off before stepping into the room. Mrs. Gosling is really worried about you. I know that. Zafir closed his eyes. How could he not know how much his mother cared for and loved him? She pursed her lips and said, go back home and get some good rest to recover from your injuries. Don't make your mother worry anymore. Zafir did not utter a single word. After Zafir got discharged from the hospital, he returned home to recuperate. As for Zoe, who was wanted by the police, she had already fled the city overnight. And because she was afraid of being apprehended, she chose to abandon her car on the freeway and flee into the woods. She even disposed of the SIM card of her cell phone. The police suspected that someone was helping Zoe from the other side of the pursuit. At that moment, in a casino located on the hillside of a village, where the interior was filled with smoke, Zoe walked into a private room wearing a mask, and the woman who was sitting at the table, smoking, and playing cards with the other people in the private room, was none other than Tiffany. After Tiffany was blacklisted from the entertainment industry, her career plummeted. Even though she had returned to her hometown, she could only hide in the casino run by her cousin to serve the customers. Tiffany, this woman said she's here to see you, said the person who brought Zoe into the room. Tiffany had just won some money. After grabbing all the money on the table, she did not continue playing but motioned the others to go out first. She then leaned back into the back of the chair with a cigarette butt lying in between her fingers and looked at Zoe. The amazing Zoe Markle, you're wanted by the police, and you've come here looking for me? Are you trying to get me implicated? Chapter 2433. That martial arts training center was located in the center of the city, close to the commercial region that was only blocks away from the administrative and financial areas. The monthly rent of the properties in that area was not cheap. It would cost at least $70,000 per month. Cameron snapped her fingers. How about I go and talk with the owner? Daisy was surprised, and it took her quite some time to understand what was on Cameron's mind. Are you telling me that you're interested in that training center? Cameron raised her eyebrows. You're right. Cameron and Daisy parked outside the training center and got out of the car. At this time, the door of the martial arts training center was tightly closed. It felt rather desolate, and very few people were in the hall. The two opened the door and stepped into the training center. A cleaner was the only person there, mopping the floor. When she noticed the two ladies, she looked at them. Are you here for someone? Daisy asked, is no one in today? The cleaner replied, the training center will undergo a renovation soon, so it's temporarily closed. Cameron crossed her arms, and her eyes lit up. Renovation? Could it be that it's run out of business? Then I got here just in time. If this is the case, taking over this training center will be a piece of cake, won't it? Daisy covered her forehead and let off an awkward smile. My God, that's way too straightforward. The cleaner took a closer look at them. Just who are you looking for? Cameron smirked. I'm here for your Grandmaster. The cleaner was taken aback. The Grandmaster? Yes, I'm looking for your Grandmaster. Cameron walked aside, looked around, and gave off a satisfied expression. If the training center is going under, do consider my proposal. After saying that, she turned around. I'm more than happy to take over this place. The corners of the cleaner's lips twitched, and she looked a little amused. I've been working here for so many years, but I've never heard that this place has been running out of business. We're just renovating the place, not closing down. Cameron waved her hand. All right, just ask the Grandmaster to come out. The cleaner shook her head and went downstairs with the mop. Daisy walked up to Cameron at that moment and asked in a low voice, please don't tell me that you're planning to forcibly take over this place. That wouldn't be too good, would it? They're only going through a renovation, not closing down. This training center is still open and well operated, so who would want to transfer its ownership to her just because she asked so? Cameron replied solemnly, I'm here asking the Grandmaster of this place to meet us. We have to be imposing. Daisy smiled without saying a word. However, after waiting for a while, the Grandmaster still did not show up, so Daisy walked up to Cameron. It doesn't seem to have worked. Cameron clicked her tongue, collected her hair, tied them up, and shoved her bag into Daisy's arms. Just wait here. She then went upstairs. Daisy was afraid she would cause more trouble, just like she did last time, so she immediately followed her. Cameron walked up to the attic and just so happened to run into a disciple of the center coming out of a room. You. It's you. The person's expression changed in an instant, and he pointed at her. He would still remember this face even if it had been burned into ashes. Otherwise, he would have been beaten for nothing. Cameron waved her hands at him, squinted, and gave off a smile. Don't get all nervous. I'm not here looking for trouble today. What are you doing here? The disciple did not dare to approach her, showing how scared he was. She shrugged. I'm here for your Grandmaster. What? The disciple looked surprised, as if something had just flashed through his mind. Are you planning to go one-on-one with our Grandmaster? Cameron narrowed her eyes slightly. Has he regarded me as a challenger? Daisy hurried over and explained with a smile, you've misunderstood. We're not here to cause trouble, Our Grandmaster hasn't come to find you to settle the score for what happened last time, and you have the guts to step into our turf first? The disciple interrupted Daisy as if he had mustered confidence out of nowhere, and the confidence quickly turned into arrogance. Our Grandmaster isn't someone you can meet whenever you want. Now, before the Grandmaster gets all worked up, I'd advise you to know your place and leave at this instant. Chapter 2434. Cameron slightly raised her eyebrows, and her smile intensified. So, are you saying that your Grandmaster is someone who can provide me with a decent challenge? She seemed to have a keen intuition for martial arts experts. The Grandmaster behind this fellow was definitely not some random martial arts practitioner. That's another reason for me to meet him. Just as Cameron was about to walk up to the disciple, she suddenly sensed the strong killing intent coming from the shadows. She immediately stopped moving forward and turned to look at the group of people standing across from the attic. Their clothes were not the same as that of the martial arts disciple, and Cameron had not seen their faces in the martial arts training center so far. At first glance, their black uniforms looked familiar, and Cameron felt like she had seen them somewhere before this. Dylan, you shouldn't be so rude to our guests. A figure came down from upstairs. The man was standing against the light, and he looked slender and tall. His turtleneck was made of cotton and linen, which looked simple and neat, and it was covered by a handmade sheepskin vest, which made him look extremely elegant. He had a crew cut, and a letter Z could be seen shaved on his temporal hair, and the black diamond earrings located at the helix of his ear were extremely dazzling. When he completely stopped at the stairwell, the light behind him faded away, and a delicate face that was giving off a wicked aura appeared. The disciple, whose name was Dylan Stiles, quickly retreated and stayed behind him. Grandmaster, it's her. She's the person that we mentioned to you. Are you the Grandmaster? Daisy was a little shocked. Shouldn't most of the Grandmasters of martial arts training centers look a little more mature? This is my first time seeing such a young Grandmaster. Cameron narrowed her eyes, staring at him with a somewhat inquisitive gaze. Before the other party said anything, Cameron started approaching him. Dylan immediately stopped her. What do you plan to do to our Grandmaster? You'll never be allowed to act presumptuously in front of our Grandmaster. With a backhand strike, Cameron pushed him away like he was a toy and stopped in front of the Grandmaster. You look very familiar. Have we met elsewhere? Both Daisy and Dylan were taken aback, staring at the both of them. The Grandmaster smiled. It's rumored that the young heir of the Southerns who traveled here all the way from the East Islands is a woman. I didn't believe it at first. I wasn't sure that it was you until I saw the Southerns' martial arts moves. You used to beat Conroy Selfridge last time. You are. Cameron crossed her arms and frowned. She was then slightly startled after thinking for a moment. Nick Wickham? Nick was still smiling. I didn't expect Mr. Southern to still remember me. Cameron scratched her cheeks, turned around, walked toward Daisy, and said in a low voice, "Let's get out first." The two wanted to leave, but the group of people who were originally on the opposite end of the attic had already appeared in front of them at some point, blocking their way. Nick's voice came from behind. Aren't you looking for me? Why are you leaving so soon? Cameron turned her head, looked at him, and forced a smile. Doesn't it look like I'm afraid that you'll avenge yourself and get innocent people implicated? Nick's smile became more reserved. Don't worry, my grievances with you won't get the innocents implicated. Not to mention that I'm not that kind of person. Those words undoubtedly connoted Cameron's involvement in a matter or two, but Cameron was the only person who knew what it meant. She chuckled. You're no longer running your business in Southeast Eurasia, but came to Bassburg and started a martial arts training center. I'm guessing that all is well? And you should have taken in a lot of apprentices, right? He nodded. Compared to the Southern clan, my training center is nothing. Cameron took a deep breath and then continued. Daisy, you should go home first. There are some personal matters that I have to discuss with Mr. Wickham. Can you handle it by yourself? Daisy was worried about her. Cameron patted her on the shoulder. Don't worry. I'll know what to do. Daisy pursed her lips, turned around, and hurriedly left the scene. After Daisy left the center, Cameron walked to the couch, sat down, picked up a teacup, and fiddled with it. I'm really sorry for making a mess at your property last time, but you can't blame me for that, right? That kid deserved it. So, Mr. Wickham, you wouldn't plan to make my life difficult just because of that kid, would you? Chapter 2435. As for what happened last time, Conroy brought it on himself. Naturally, I don't care about that matter, but, Nick looked at Cameron, walked toward her, and stopped in front of her. It's about time for us to resolve the grievances between us in one go. Cameron lifted her gaze and looked at him. How do you plan to resolve it? Nick leaned over and approached her with a profound smirk. I wonder if your skills have improved. I would like to get into the ring with you once again. After Daisy left the training center, she called Waylon and told him about Cameron's decision to stay back in that place because she was worried about her. Upon hearing that, the pen in Waylon's hand stopped writing. Are you saying the owner of the martial arts training center holds some sort of grudge against Cameron? Probably. I can feel it. Daisy lowered her gaze. Waylon, I'm very worried about Cameron. No matter how strong Cameron is, the opponent doesn't seem to be some random weakling, either. What if Cameron were to run into some trouble? Waylon was silent for half a second. Okay, understood. After the call was over, Waylon closed the documents on the desk and summoned Leonardo. Leonardo walked into the office. Mr. Goldman, is my assistance needed? Waylon got up. Something just came up, and I have to go out. Help me look into the background of Nick Wickham, the owner of this martial arts training center. Leonardo was stunned for a moment, and before he could react, Waylon had already left the room. At the same time, in the training center, Cameron and Nick had already gone against each other for a few rounds in the ring. Their moves were equally terrifying. It could be said that they were evenly matched. Dylan was nervous and fearful as he witnessed the fight from the audience. Cameron's moves were unpredictable, and she was extremely cautious in both her offense and defense. Meanwhile, Nick did not dare to let his guard down. His successive attacks left Cameron with no room to catch her breath. He avoided Cameron's attack, took 2 steps backward, wiped his lips, and scoffed. After all these years, you don't seem to have made much progress. Cameron turned around and gave him a sideways kick, but he blocked it with both arms. The force would have cracked his arms if he had not been training all these years. Cameron continued to take an offensive stance, but Nick continued to evade her. "You're too slow." He seemed to be able to see Cameron's moves clearly and defend himself against every single move she made, but at the same time, he could not make a move. Dylan looked at this scene with a worried expression. Does the Grandmaster have no chance to fight back at all? The middle-aged man beside him snorted. It's not that the Grandmaster has no chance to retaliate. He's just waiting for the opportunity. Didn't you notice that the Grandmaster has been testing her, trying to figure out her moves? Dylan suddenly realized it. So that's how it is. The Grandmaster is indeed a real powerhouse. Cameron's moves were all arduous, but fruitless, and soon, she fell into a corner. Even though she knew that her opponent had only been prodding her to test her out, he would definitely have the upper hand as soon as she showed a tiny opening. How can you manage to get distracted at this moment? Nick suddenly appeared right in front of her. Cameron was startled, but it was already too late for her to fight back. His palm hit her on the shoulder, and she took a few steps back instantly and was about to fall out of the ring. A hand grabbed her arm in time to keep her from falling, and Nick did not let go of her. You really haven't changed at all. A scene flashed across Cameron's mind, and a hint of cunningness surged from the bottom of her eyes. Who said so? She turned over suddenly, and before Nick could return to his senses, he had already been dragged off the ring by Cameron. When the two fell off the ring, Dylan and the others rushed forward. Grandmaster. Cameron stood up from the ground, patted her clothes, and grinned. You didn't win either. Dylan pointed at her. You're so cunning that you even turned to such dirty tricks. If the Grandmaster had not grabbed you just now, you would have fallen long ago. You're just someone who won't admit defeat. Chapter 2436. Who told you that I'm someone who won't admit defeat? I admit that Mr. Wickham is a decent match, so as the saying goes, all is fair when it comes to war. Mr. Wickham should know this too, shouldn't he? Cameron responded to Dylan's accusation with confidence. Nick stood up slowly, covered his face with his palms, and chuckled after a short while. I didn't expect you to still be as cunning as ever. You even turned to this kind of trick. Cameron stroked her sleeves unconcernedly. I used to look down upon the usage of such tactics, but people change. I can only say that you've underestimated your foe. Dylan was trembling with anger. Why, you're really shameless. She sneered. Shameless people are the invincible ones in the world. Anyway, I learned it from Wayne. You. Nick raised his hand to interrupt Dylan's sentence, glanced at Cameron, and laughed. You're right. I underestimated my enemy and gave you a chance to play dirty. Then can we leave our grievances behind already? He frowned and did not utter a single word. Dylan was on the verge of losing his cool. You're really pushing the limits here. Cameron picked her ears and wrapped her arm around Nick's shoulders, naturally as if he was one of her buddies who had a close relationship with him. Hey, your apprentice doesn't seem to know his place very well, huh? Aren't you going to say something about this? Nick frowned slightly. His gaze was fixed on the arm that was lying on his shoulder. This is her usual style. She's still acting like the Mr. Southern, the overlord of the East Islands that I got to know back then. Still so frivolous, hippie, and acting in an unconventional, cruel, and ruthless style. That's why she never left a great impression. It can be said that we've always been going against each other in all aspects of life. Cameron Southern of the East Islands has always made me loathe her. I don't even think that being someone that she recognizes is worth showing off and feeling happy about. On the contrary, I hate being tied to her. I haven't seen her in years, and I thought I'd never see her again. Although I've heard rumors about her from my acquaintances in the East Islands, I only thought it was ridiculous as rumors can't be trusted. That was until the other day when Conroy got into trouble. I checked the surveillance footage from the training center and accidentally saw those familiar moves. That's how I got a great deal of confidence in my guesses. Cameron Southern is indeed a woman. Cameron. A familiar voice came from behind, and Cameron trembled instantly and turned her head slowly. Shit. No one knew when Waylon appeared in the center, and his gaze shifted from side to side, glancing around the interior of the ring, and landed indifferently on her arm that was lying on Nick's shoulder. At that moment, no one could clearly decipher the emotions shown on his face. Have you been having fun? She quickly withdrew her hand and smiled awkwardly. It's all right. It was indeed rather fun. He raised his eyebrows unconcernedly. Cameron came to his side in a hurry and quickly changed her explanation. Just kidding, it wasn't fun at all. On the contrary, they were bullying me. Dylan rolled his eyes. We were bullying you? You're obviously the one who bullied us. You even cheated when you were about to lose the fight, and you're now trying to push the blame onto us? Just how shameless can you be? Humph. Cameron gnashed her teeth secretly, but her expression looked pitiful and wronged, as if she was innocent. Waylon lifted his gaze and looked at Nick. Mr. Wickham, I've long heard of you. Nick narrowed his eyes. Do you know me? Wayne wrapped his arms around Cameron's waist as if he was declaring his sovereignty unintentionally. I know Cam, so it's only natural for me to know a thing or two about you, Mr. Wickham. Cameron was a little surprised and suspicious. I didn't seem to tell him about my relationship with Nick, did I? His explanation made sense to Nick, but his smirk looked a little enigmatic. I see. It seems that Mr. Southern has mentioned me to you. Just as Cameron wanted to deny it, Waylon pressed her into his arms. I heard that you're quite skilled, Mr. Wickham. If there's a chance, I really want to see it for myself. Chapter 2437. Nick nodded. I look forward to that. Waylon took Cameron away. After leaving the training center, Cameron broke free from his arms and looked at him. Do you really know Nick? Waylon stared at her face. Aren't you afraid that I'll be jealous when you keep on mentioning another man in front of me? Cameron choked on her own words. You? Getting jealous? What's there to be jealous of? Waylon pressed her against the hood of the car, pinched her chin, and moved half an inch closer to her. Are the both of you close? She did not even hesitate for a moment before answering, I wouldn't consider us to be close. Waylon was at a loss. He seemed helpless, because she answered his question so confidently and did not seem to be lying. He rubbed the corners of her lips with his fingertips and lowered his head to kiss her, and Cameron immediately propped her hands against his chest. There are people here. Waylon clasped the back of her head with his palm, diminishing every single inch of gaps that existed between them. He then slowly opened his eyes, and his gaze flicked across the glass windows of the martial arts training center as if he knew someone was watching, but he did not mind being watched. Dylan looked at the two figures standing in front of the car and said, What the hell? They're just shamelessly showing affection at the doorstep of someone else's property. Nick did not say anything, turned around, and went upstairs. At Emperon. The two figures were all over each other in the entryway. Waylon picked Cameron up and placed her on the shoe cabinet. The sudden quake shook the vase and caused it to fall onto the carpet. He covered her with his body without giving her any chance to mentally prepare herself. Cameron bit his shoulders and clenched her hands, which created creases on his shirt. After an unknown amount of time, Waylon wrapped himself around Cameron, who was naked at the moment, and they walked into the bathroom together. Cameron jerked him all of a sudden and dragged him into the bathtub. The water splashed in all directions. Waylon's nightgown got soaked, and water droplets slid down his cheeks. Seeing this scene, Cameron could not help but laugh out loud. Waylon brushed his 5 fingers through her hair, pulled it back, and chuckled out of anger. "It seems that the lesson I just taught you isn't enough?" Cameron snorted, turned her face away, and ignored him. Waylon slowly undid the belt of his nightgown, and Cameron was stunned. "What are you doing?" He lifted his gaze. "Didn't you just invite me to join you? Since when did I invite you in? Get out." Cameron wanted to push him out of the bathtub. As soon as he withdrew his arms around her waist, Cameron was caught off guard and threw herself into his arms. "Are you still angry?" She froze for a moment, then struggled to sit up. "Wayne Goldman, you're so sure that I won't kick your ass, huh? That's why you have the balls to bully me, right?" Waylon grinned and rubbed her cheek with his palm. "Why would you think that I'm bullying you? What you just did. How is that not called bullying?" His smile intensified. "What did I just do?" Cameron's cheeks became warmer and warmer. She bit her lip and said nothing. "I only got into a fight with Nick, didn't I? I let what happened back in the car slide, but this fella didn't even let me off after coming back home. But the point is, won't this man get tired? But I really love bullying you so much, so what should I do about it?" Waylon sorted out the ends of her wet hair, left the bundle of hair on her back, and stared at her face. After saying that, he pressed his face against her ear. "Besides, that's how I show my affection for you." Cameron's cheeks became even warmer. "Shut up." Waylon kissed Cameron, which caused her body to tremble. She then gently pushed him away. "No, no way. If this continues, I'll die here." He laughed. "Then will you still try to make me feel jealous after this?" Cameron frowned. "Is this how he reacts when he's jealous?" Waylon raised his eyebrows, waiting for her to answer the question. Cameron turned her face away. "Don't use your jealousy as an excuse. You act like this no matter if you're jealous or not. He bullies me no matter what happens." Waylon laughed out loud. "It seems that you already know me very well." Cameron was so exasperated that she pushed him. "I want to take a bath now." "You, get out now." Chapter 2438. Waylon held the back of her head and sealed her lips completely. Cameron was so infuriated that she wanted to bite him. However, as if he had known how she would react to his actions, he immediately pulled his lips away from her. Cameron grabbed a slipper and threw it at him. Waylon dodged the projectile by hiding behind the door, and the shoe flew by his body, missing its target. He then laughed out loud. "How are you still so adorable when you're pissed? Wayne Goldman, get lost." After Waylon left, Cameron lay on the side of the bathtub, and her cheeks blushed. "That fella must have bewitched me. Otherwise, how could I? How could I almost accept his suggestion earlier?" In the study room, Waylon sat behind the desk and read the materials that Leonardo had sent him. Nick Wickham, the owner of the Martial Arts Training Center, was considered quite a figure back in Southeast Eurasia. The Wickhams had risen to fame in Southeast Eurasia. After Nick's father, the patriarch of the family, retired from the army, he worked as an undercover drug agent for the police and helped them bust a drug operation, and he was then promoted. His mother, Wendy Woodward, was a lawyer, and his uncle, Bingham Woodward, owned a series of entertainment venues and had a huge network of connections. After graduating from the University of Chapstow, Nick ran an entertainment venue with his uncle, and among Bingham's circle of connections was Sonny. Bingham had introduced Nick to Sonny. The latter believed Nick had the potential and decided to accept him as his apprentice. That was how Sonny became Nick's master. Waylon leaned back in his chair, frowning slightly. It turns out Nick and Cameron have known each other for a long time. And he had witnessed the match between Nick and Cameron. Nick's skills were really good, and both learned martial arts from Sonny, so it was not surprising that Nick could see through Cameron's moves. The next day, Cameron visited Daisy again and said she wanted to go to the training center again. After hearing that, Daisy was a little surprised. Yesterday was so dangerous. Why would you still want to go back? Cameron smiled and waved her hands. It's not dangerous at all. I actually know Nick very well. Daisy was puzzled. You guys know each other very well? Cameron continued. Yeah, my father is his master. His master is Mr. Southern? Daisy was astonished. I thought that the grievance between Cameron and Nick was something serious before. After all that, it turns out that there's no enmity at all? Cameron rested her arm on her shoulders. He's the apprentice that my father took in from Southeast Eurasia. Once, I had a fight with his men and even demolished his property when I went to Southeast Eurasia on a trip. How would I know that the boss of those men is an apprentice of my father's? Since then, the grievance between us has never ended. Whenever I went to Southeast Eurasia, he'd do something to make my life difficult, and whenever he came to the East Islands, I'd do the same to him. After saying that, she sighed. I was young and presumptuous back then. I couldn't beat him, but I wanted to provoke him for fun, so I did something that really pissed him off. The corner of Daisy's lips twitched. What exactly did you do? Cameron felt embarrassed and scratched her cheek. I sent 3 trans women into his room. Daisy inhaled sharply. You did get away easy, as he didn't beat you to death yesterday. Dylan was very occupied in the lobby of the training center, so he did not even turn his head when he heard someone push the doors in. Sorry, we're closed for today. Yo, you're still closed today? Hearing a woman's voice, Dylan turned his head around and saw Cameron, and his expression changed instantly. Why is it you again? Cameron walked up to the couch, sat down on her own, and picked up the teacup that was displayed on the table. Where's Nick? Tell him to come out quickly. I really have something to talk to him about this time around. Daisy sat down too. Dylan crossed his arms. Miss Southern, please go home if you're only here for leisure. The Grandmaster is a busy man. Chapter 2439. Cameron took a sip of tea. It's okay. I have the time. Dylan rolled his eyes, seeing that she was going to stay here. Just what do you want? Our Grandmaster has already promised not to retaliate against you, so don't push your luck. Cameron crossed her legs. I'm here to make an offer, and you're saying that I'm pushing my luck. What's wrong with you? Are you making a lot of money? Even if you despise me, at least show money a tad bit of respect. Dylan was startled. What do you mean by that? She waved her hand. You won't understand even if I explain everything to you. Now go and get Nick to come out and meet me. Dylan wanted to say something else, but a middle-aged man's voice came from upstairs. Dylan, let Miss Southern through. Dylan curled his lips and said reluctantly, please come with me. That's more like it. Cameron stood up with a smile, turned her head around, and said to Daisy, wait for me here. Daisy nodded. Cameron went upstairs and came to Nick's office. Nick had just made coffee and walked to the couch with the coffee and sat down. What do you want from me? After Cameron sat down, she took a glance around the room. I only want to discuss something with you. He paused and lifted his gaze. Cameron looked at him and gave off a grin. Your place is located in a phenomenal location. Nick put down the cup. What are you trying to say? Why don't you cooperate with me, Anne? Don't even think about it. He refused immediately. Cameron choked on her reply. I haven't even finished my sentence yet. I don't even have to wait until you finish. Isn't it obvious that you've taken a fancy to this location and are trying to get your hands on my training center? He then scoffed. Mr. Southern. Oh, my bad, it's Miss Southern now. Are you telling me that you're short of funds to set up a martial arts training center? Theoretically, I don't lack the funds, but there's a lack of good locations. Cameron got up, walked up to him, and sat down beside him. Nick stared at her with a hint of surprise flashing across his eyes, but she did not care. So, why don't we work together? Look, after all, we're acquaintances. Why give the opportunity to some outsiders when you can give it to someone that you know? Am I right? Nick laughed abruptly and looked at her. You're really competent when it comes to planning for the future. She raised her eyebrows. What do you think? Nick got up and walked aside. Still, I won't accept the proposal. Cameron stood up and walked toward him. But why? Wait a minute. You don't even plan to listen to my offer? He turned to look at her. If you plan to take advantage of somebody, find someone like the eldest son of the Goldmans. Why would you come to me with this plan? What makes you think that this is the suitable thing to do? Cameron choked on her own words. I do want to take advantage of him, but Nick putting it forward so bluntly really makes things sound so bad. Nick turned to face her. When you were still the young male heir of the Southerns, would you even come to me asking for a collaboration? And would you give out a share of your pie to someone else? However, I can understand why you want to form a collaborative relationship now. After all, you were never a man that had a spine in the first place. From what I can see, you want to work together only because you've taken a fancy to the location of this place, but you don't really plan to set up a martial arts training center, do you? Cameron's expression turned slightly restrained, and she frowned. What do you mean by that? Nick snorted, laughed out loud, and turned around. You've chosen to be with a man from the Goldmans. They're from a family full of entrepreneurs and businessmen, so everything is about profit. Is this location a place that you chose yourself or a location that they fancy? And why should I trust you? Cameron instantly understood what he was trying to say. It's obvious that he thinks that I'm not the person who's interested in this location, but someone from the Goldmans. Cameron crossed her arms and felt amused. Do you think I've come here on behalf of the Goldmans? And I'm doing so only because I want to purchase this land and not because I sincerely wish to work together with you. He looked indifferent. Who knows? She suppressed her smile and took a deep breath. The Goldmans have a huge company in Bassburg, so do you think they'd need a location like this? I do have the idea of setting up a martial arts training center here, and I indeed have my eyes fixed on this location. I won't force you if you don't want to work with me, but don't just go around crowning your thoughts over what others have in mind. My plan to cooperate with you has nothing to do with the Goldmans. Chapter 2440. Nick turned to look at Cameron. Since when did you learn to speak for others? Cameron was startled. I'm telling the truth. He did not say anything. Cameron narrowed her eyes. Please don't tell me that you're still holding grudges against me? He frowned. What? I know. What I did back then was a little too much. I can apologize to you. After all, I was only a young and presumptuous girl back then. After saying that, Cameron laughed and approached him all of a sudden. Your martial arts training center teaches the Southerns fist techniques. It suits me just fine, doesn't it? Worst comes to worst, you can continue to be the grandmaster of this place, and I'll only be one of the shareholders or something like that, or maybe one of the trainers once in a while. After a while, Cameron was driven out of the office. Cameron was caught off guard. She then turned around and yelled, Hey! Why would you kick me out? Hey, Nick, what do you think? At least say something. I'll be investing in his martial arts training center, and he's not happy about that? Is he dumb or what? Nick leaned against the door with his palms covering his face, and the tips of his ears were flushed. Seeing that Cameron was muttering something and coming downstairs, Daisy got up slowly. Cameron, how did the discussion go? Cameron took a deep breath and scoffed angrily. You tell me. Is he a dumb *SS or what? I told him that I wanted to work with him and invest in his training center, but he rejected my proposal and even kicked me out. That fella is truly hopeless. Daisy was astounded. He rejected you, otherwise? Cameron crossed her arms and sank into deep thought. Or could it be that he doesn't believe me? Daisy had no choice but to walk up to her. Cameron, why don't we go and search for another location? Cameron thought for a moment and nodded. What else can we do other than that? They were about to leave the place, but Nick came downstairs at that moment. Wait a minute. Cameron and Daisy turned their heads and saw him standing in front of the stairs. I can agree to your proposal. Cameron and Daisy exchanged gazes, raised their eyebrows, and smirked. The three sat on the couch, and Nick asked Dylan to bring the contract. Dylan curled his lips and handed over the contract reluctantly. Cameron took it, but he did not let go of the stack of documents immediately. Cameron raised her head and tugged a few times before Dylan let go of the contract and turned his face away. Cameron picked up the pen and was about to leave her signature. Nick leaned back in his chair. Are you planning to sign the contract without even skimming through it? Cameron lifted her gaze and let off a smile. I trust you. Nick was rendered speechless. After signing the contract, Cameron handed the contract back to Nick. I'll transfer the money to your account when the time comes, not a penny less. Nick took the contract from her without saying a word. Cameron then left the training center with Daisy. After watching them leave, Dylan asked Nick, Grandmaster, why would you agree to work with her? I don't think she's reliable at all. Nick held the contract and remained silent. After a long time, he stood up. Remember to inform the others about this. Even if Dylan did not want to do so, the Grandmaster of the training center had already spoken, so he could only follow through. On the side of the city, Cameron was driving on the road. Daisy turned to look at her. Cameron, do you really trust Nick? She smiled and replied, don't be fooled by Nick's annoying attitude. He's not a bad man. He's very righteous, loyal to his men, and a man of principles. Otherwise, my father wouldn't have taught him the Southern's fist techniques. Daisy leaned on the back of the seat. I see. Cameron turned her head and glanced at her. Otherwise, he would have killed me to avenge himself a long time ago. However, I was quite surprised. I really didn't expect to meet him in Bassburg. Daisy sneered. You're not afraid that my brother will be jealous, huh? Cameron choked on her reply. Why would he be jealous? Nick and I aren't.